What's up, Queens? It's your host, Ro. Do you like female dating strategy? Would you like to see us expand on a lot of different platforms? Then please sign up for our Patreon. We are currently targeting a $10,000 per month goal, which would allow us to work full time on female dating strategy content in order to expand on different platforms and upgrade our media presence. As a special thank you to our current Patreon subscribers, we will be increasing our upload rate for our bonus content to be weekly on Fridays, as well as offering a special discount for paid annual memberships. So please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/the female dating strategy. That's patreon.com/the female dating strategy. Thank you. Let's start the show. What's up, Queens? Welcome to the Female Dating Strategy Podcast, the meanest female-only podcast on the internet. I'm your host, Ro.
And this is Savannah.
And this is Lola.
And today we have the return of our esteemed guest, Dr. Gail Dines.
Hi, Gail.
Welcome back.
Hey, so great to be back. I'm so looking forward to this. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all well.
Yeah, we're doing great. Your episode was a fan favorite. So a lot of people had never really heard comprehensive porn criticism from a respected educator before your podcast. So thank you for coming to our platform and giving us, the tools to keep discussing the harms of porn and just, really introducing our audience to the foundation of female dating strategy, which does have a lot of basis in porn critique.
Great. I think that's why you're so popular. You're so one of the few places that does.
Yeah, it's not without criticism, to be honest, from a lot of other mainstream feminist publications. So we have a conference that's coming up in a few weeks. I don't know if you want to actually talk about that first, but we're actually, surprise, all of our guests are going to be hearing this for the first time. We will be giving a lecture as part of this conference, and we're going to talk about how our porn criticism was a basis for the expansion of female dating strategy, and how a lot of women, for the first time, because of visiting female dating strategy, finally had the language to understand what was going on in their relationships, sexually, as well as like just general dating culture and how it's been influenced by the influx of porn.
Totally. And people love you. I have to say, when I was on that and I got, so many emails afterwards, and people just love what you're doing. Women love what you're doing because in a way you're a lifesaver. You're countering the narrative of pornography from a feminist perspective. And, a lot of the so-called, I call them faux feminists, are trying to say how great porn is and how empowering. And I think you're telling the truth of women's lives.
Oh, shucks. Thank you.
It's always great to hear good feedback because we get dragged so much. A lot of that has to do with like the expansion of Onlyfans, especially during the pandemic and the recession that was induced by the pandemic. There's just been seemingly like this media push to really like legitimize the sex profession and say this is going to be empowering and this is like an avenue for women because of the fact that there's just so many women who are now becoming reliant on the sex industry because they're out of work.
Totally. But let me just tell you, the average woman on OnlyFans makes something like $300 a month. So, you always see in the media somebody is making hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, that is so rare. And in fact, many of the women who end up on OnlyFans are in a worse position afterwards because they can't get hired because of their digital footprint. They get doxxed, they get capped, they get death threats. So, there's a whole seedy side. Well, the whole thing is seedy, but you never actually hear what's going on with these women. And I've spoken to a number of women who did OnlyFans, and they so regret it. But they're desperate for money, and I understand that. It's just we live in a culture where how do women make money? Right? By being part of the sex industry. And it is a minimal amount of money. Let's be very clear about this.
Yeah, that's been pretty apparent even from reading a lot of the Reddits that are dedicated to sex workers and to women who work on OnlyFans, is that Reddit is actually responsible for a lot of their traffic. So you'll see a lot of them. It was so bad at one point that like women who had OnlyFans pages were just spamming a lot of different subreddits trying to get people to subscribe to their OnlyFans, to the point where those major subreddits started banning them and saying, okay, you can't promote your OnlyFans here. But even they would admit like, oh, I've only made $50 and I've been spamming all of the subreddits. Mm-hmm. And that was their way of actually doing their OnlyFans marketing.
There's actually another way. They have what they call a referral scheme, which I prefer to call a pimping scheme. So let's think, OnlyFans is actually a pimping platform. They pimp out the women because they take 20% of what they make, and also they offer the women extra money if they bring friends to OnlyFans. They give them a percentage of their earnings. So not only are they pimping out women, they're turning the women into pimps because they're desperate for money, these women. So they'll bring their friends on and what have you. So I just see it as one big pimping pyramid scheme.
And what's interesting about that referral aspect of it is that Tim Stokely actually introduced that to ensure that the business would survive, because he had several failed businesses, and his dad, who was an investment banker for Barclays, was like, okay, OnlyFans is your last shot. This is the last time I'm going to give you 10 grand. So he actually introduced that incentive just to keep the business going, like not necessarily to even help out the women who benefit from that particular scheme. It's really exploitative, really exploitative if you think about it.
Well, anyone who's setting up a kind of sex camming site is not out there to help women.
Yes.
I mean, they're out there to make money, and they're making money off monetizing women's bodies. So, don't look to these as any saviors of women, believe me.
And monetizing like the bodies of really vulnerable women as well. Like, it's really sad to see the discourse on social media when you see sex workers say, oh, women with disabilities, OnlyFans is their only option, as if, their only contribution to society can be them, sexually servicing men.
Exactly. And actually, I would say, rather than calling them sex workers, they're really sexually exploited. It's not really, I don't really see this as work because of the conditions under which they have to do this. The fact is that they're being pimped out. I think the porn industry, the sex industry in general, wants us to think about it as work, because what it does is that it kind of whitewashes the reality of what life is like for women in the sex industry. And, what job description do you have where you have to go to work naked, where you have to listen to all these creepy men telling you what to do sexually? It's just sexual exploitation. And the women who've exited the sex industry always say it was paid rape. It was not work. I was sexually exploited, and it was sexual slavery. So the women I work with who've exited the industry, all different types of the industry, never call themselves sex workers.
So one of the common threads we've seen among people who are on OnlyFans is that OnlyFans is actually, to be successful in OnlyFans, you generally have to go through the traditional porn system. And the traditional porn system is obviously very exploitative because you're dealing with mostly producers and directors that are men. And the argument that some women have made is that, okay, well, if you're doing an OnlyFans, it puts the power, I guess the direction and the power back in the hands of the actual content creator. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say, first of all, just by we know how much money they make, they haven't got power, they're scrambling to just put food on the table. And also, what kind of a world is it where this is the way that women can survive financially? I mean, we have to sort of realize we live in a patriarchal society where women's worth is measured in, quote, their hotness. And so I think it's just one, big exploitation of women's bodies, the monetization, commodification. It doesn't put anything in women's hands. What it does is actually often takes away from their power, because employers follow their digital footprint. They often get fired. They get death threats. They get stalked. All of these things they don't talk about on OnlyFans. And that's the reality of the women on there. So, and also the women are asked to do stuff straight out of porn with dildos and what have you. And some of the men, will bring actually porn and say, do this. And so, the women are often coerced into doing sex they really don't want to do. But if they don't, they'll lose their fan base. Very true.
The argument that we've made publicly is that creating a profit incentive for women sexually servicing men inherently can't really be feminist, and that it's just in another patriarchal system. And it's kind of interesting that the sex work is work mantra has gone unchecked without anybody looking at it through the lens of, okay, in what context are we talking about it being work. We're talking about it essentially being sexual entertainment and women providing a sexual service to men. And when you incentivize that, you incentivize them to have sex against their desire and will because they have to make money to live, right? And every time, our big push, at least at Female Dating Strategy, is to normalize the idea that sex is something that women do solely for our own pleasure and not as a service to anyone else. But it's really, really surprising because on both sides of the political aisle, they both have seemed to just had this like consigned resignation that sex is a service women have to perform for men. On the conservative side, a lot of times they talk about sex being like your marital duty or something you're supposed to do because as a wife, you're obligated to give your body to your husband. And then they have all those purity balls and this worship of virginity. And on the other hand, on the more liberal side, you still have this idea that women exist to sexually service men and that porn is a way for women to make money and that women having sex with men, ideas like bait and sex, ideas of that women's bodies can be monetized, that under the capitalist system, somehow this is going to be empowering for women. That idea still gets perpetrated from more liberal magazines, and there's like no pushback on the idea.
That's right. And what's so interesting about these woke men who are arguing this is that a lot of them have a really good analysis of capitalism. Right? They understand the nature of exploited labor. And yet when it comes to porn, it's like all of that analysis goes out the door. It's like they can't hold on to that analysis and have an erection. You have to pick which one, because once they get aroused, their analysis is out the door. Suddenly, porn is unlike any other industry. It's not exploitive. It's not even in a capitalist system. And I speak to these guys. I say, well, you criticize capitalism, as I would, for its exploitive nature of labor. Well, think about women and what it does. But then you get words like empowerment thrown at you and sex positive. So it's like all their brains just drop out of their head,
Ugh, don't get me started on socialist men. I think a lot of them are not even arguing in good faith. In my personal dating experience, I find a lot of these, left-leaning men are snakes hiding in the sand.
Opportunists.
A lot of them are actually very predatory. And, I'm still a socialist. I'm still left-wing, but I'm feeling very betrayed by, the men within my own, political group.
Totally. And that makes perfect sense. And Andrew Dworkin once said, really, it doesn't matter if you're being fucked from the right or fucked from the left. You end up being fucked. So, both are it's the same. It's two sides of the same coin. Is that the notion is that sex is dirty and the dirt in it is women. And that on the right, the dirt stays just with the husband who's had access to women. And then on the left, all men can have access to her. So it's really the same idea. It's just deciding whether you're going to democratize the access or keep it just with the husband.
It's like sexual communism on the left. We've made fun of that idea, but yeah.
I also think the big problem is that because liberal feminists have really gotten behind this idea and have been feeding them these talking points. I've criticized liberal feminism as basically being the PR wing of the porn industry, where anytime someone tries to make a critique of the porn industry, you have liberal feminists coming in to jump in and say well, this is these women's choice. And what if a woman wants to do this? And they don't want to have the difficult discussion about the inherently unfair power dynamics and inherently exploitative nature of the sex industry towards women and how that can completely and totally perpetuate this patriarchy and inequality they purport to want to upend. And because they don't want to do that analysis and they just want to leave it at a very surface level, it gives a lot of these other men who are part of this fringe movement the confidence to kind of come out and just say, well, yeah, I'm supporting women by supporting the sex industry, by, buying porn, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you put it so well. That was just perfectly put, is the way in which these men, they want to have it both ways. And they say they're supporting us, when in reality, what they're fighting for is their right to have complete and utter access to women's bodies. That's what they're arguing. And then they have the cheek to hide behind women. And when liberal feminists come out with this pro-porn, empowerment, blah, blah, blah argument, it's such a betrayal of their sisters. Because when women say it, the men then can throw the women and say, forward and say, look, she says it, it's not me. So it's does such damage to women and feminism when these so-called liberal feminists defend it. And let me say, many of these women who defend it and say it's great, they're not doing it. They've got nice, cushy jobs in the academy with tenure and stuff. They're not standing on the street corners tussling, you know?
Right.
Yeah, the absolute smugness of someone with a desk job saying, like, all work is exploitation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was in the academy for 32 years, and I have to tell you, you know, when I went to work, I didn't have to have panic buttons in my office. I wasn't raped for money, and that they would compare academia, which is a really cushy number. I mean, especially if you got tenure, you know, you basically got a job for life, and you get paid to think, you get paid to talk, you get paid to teach. I mean, it's just a wonderful job. And then they have the absolute gall to suggest that they're doing, you know, academic work and the women out there are doing sex work. I find that so abhorrent, just abhorrent.
I mean, again, unfortunately, like we weren't like alive when a lot of these conversations were being had in like the first or in second wave feminism. But it did seem to me that, you know, the second wave of feminism seemed like a lot of middle class, mostly white women. And that was the criticism of the move in the first place. We're like, okay, being chained to the home as homemakers is like, we're not fulfilling our potential, that it's a system of oppression. And so they fought to be able to make gains in a workplace, but largely focused on white collar work. And then when it came to like working class women, were basically like, oh, well, go do sex work, right? And it's like, well, if you thought living in a nice home with sexually servicing a single man was oppressive, why wouldn't this be oppressive, right? Like if you're a woman who can barely make ends meet and you have to sexually service multiple men, to me, it just didn't compute like how they felt like something that was, you know, relatively cushy and privileged for most of the world's women was oppressive, but then can't see how it could be inherently oppressive for working class women. And then they get confused.
Or women of color. Remember, women of color here. I mean, so many of the gains that white elite women made was on the backs of poor white women and poor black women. I mean, when they went out of the home to work, who was cleaning the home? Who was doing the childcare? Who was doing all the shit work that you need to keep the house going while those women were going out to work? So this is where a big rift in the second wave came when Betty Friedan in The Feminine Mystique said to women, go out and get a job. And black women knew immediately, especially in the United States, well, okay, who's going to come in and do the shit work? It's going to be us. And so it really was built on the backs. And they continued to do this when they put forward the notion of sex work and the notion that it's a legitimate way to earn money and it's okay for those women. Because, you know, the further away you are from having to service men and having, you know, a dick put in your mouth for $10, the more you can say it's an okay way to live. And they wouldn't want their daughters to do this either. That's clear. But it's okay for those other women, and it's okay for their daughters, those women's daughters. So I just, again, it's such an elitist, racist, classist argument that there's a category of women who should be out there doing so-called sex work.
Yeah, and I think they're then confused why a lot of these women turn to conservatism. And I'm like, well, if you put them in a position where you say their feminism relies on like being sexually available, you can see a lot of women kind of rebuffing against it. I know Andrea Dworkin talks about that way more eloquently than I can.
Exactly. But, and right-wing women, yeah.
Yeah, about right-wing women, about like how, you know, it's so far and away impractical for women, especially if they work, you know, gendered work, if they're doing jobs where most of their workforce is women, like nursing, teaching, house cleaning, etc. You know, they're not necessarily, you know, they're looking for answers and solutions to make their lives materially better. And when like your reaction to them is like, oh, go do sex work, or like, wanting them to focus on women in white collar jobs and like getting the corner office. And then a lot of women who aren't in that kind of career track are like, okay, well then how does this help me? And how does your feminism actually make my life better? And that's not always, that case is not always made clear.
I know. And the truth is, remember, in the second wave, radical feminists always talked about liberation. We never talked about empowerment, because liberation was the collective liberation of all women. Empowerment is a neoliberal individualistic term, which basically says, if I'm okay, then fuck you. Right? Because this is what empowerment is. Liberation is, if you are not okay, if my sister over there is not okay, then you know what? I will do whatever it takes to make her life okay. So it was really much more of a kind of collective idea that we're all in this together, we're all sisters, and that we fight for each other and we have each other's backs. And what's happened in this faux feminism is just throwing women under the bus. You know, these elite women are throwing white women and poor white women and women of colour under the bus. And what's interesting in what I always found amazing, well, and whatever Andrea Dworkin wrote, I was always, knocked out by the brilliance. But she said, right-wing women aren't stupid. They know exactly what feminists know, that men can be lethal and dangerous, and what right-wing women are doing are just figuring out the best way to survive.
Yeah. So with that, since we're kind of talking about working class women and people of color, the most infuriating argument that I have seen coming out of this this OnlyFans fiasco is, I know we kind of touched on it, but that supporting the sex industry is somehow empowering disabled people, the LGBT community, and people of color. And they've done a very sly bait and switch where they've now, in the name of inclusivity, have made these people the forefronting face of the sex industry in order to garner sympathy, despite the fact that they're probably, and not even probably, definitely based on all of the available information, making the least money from this industry and being exploited the most, because it is completely legal to assign less monetary value to people based on their race, based on their sex, based on their sexual orientation, right? So what do you think of the media switch into trying to use people like this as the face of the sex industry and justify its existence?
Well, it's what men are doing, is that basically they've put women's bodies, especially, again, poor women and poor white women and women of colour, they've made them the shield. So, and the men hide behind it. If you notice in many of the debates, you very rarely see in the media a John interview saying, well, I really want to jerk off to this slut because, this is what I like to do. You don't hear the Johns talk. And by the way, I don't think there's such a thing as a slut. It's obviously a patriarchal invention. But they have used white women, these liberal feminists, and these liberal feminists have allowed themselves to be used as a shield and as shills of the industry. And I want to give a really sort of clear example. About a few years ago, we had a conference. Although I live in the States, we did a conference in the UK on porn. And we got picketed by the so-called sex workers organisations, and they were outside, and it was a cold day, and there was a few men, mainly the pimps, and they were picketing, and then it started to rain. I mean, just pour with rain, and all the men took shelter and left the women outside in the rain, picketing us. They were soaked to the skin. They were barely clothed, and meanwhile, the guys had gone to the local coffee shop to have a cup of tea to keep warm. It was, it was just so, and we actually went outside and we said to the women, come in, we'll give you a cup of tea, we'll give you some biscuits, come in, don't be outside in the rain. And it was just so clear there was the women getting soaked through to the skin and the guys taking shelter. And that's what they do. They shelter behind women. And then other women feel, well, if these women are saying it's sex work and it's okay, who am I as a woman to say that's not okay? And then what happens is, because we have an individual analysis and not a collective, it looks like a cat fight. When in fact what it is a political movement to basically liberate women from the sex industry. It's not a one-on-one cat fight here. These are our sisters, the women in the sex industry. They're not our enemies.
Yeah, I think the framing of the idea that feminism is about liberation instead of just or solely individual empowerment is what's been missing totally from feminist media.
Also, the notion of empowerment is just, I feel like, when you say I feel empowered, that's just a feeling. It's like,
that's
it's
right.
the sort of adrenaline rush of doing something taboo, I guess. And, I find, people who say that they feel empowered when they do porn, I wonder if they're conflating real power with
like a dopamine hit from adrenaline or something.
When you do something taboo, you get that sort of thrill, right? That can often be conflated with, dopamine hit or whatever. It makes you feel like you're on top of the world, but you're actually not.
But the women in the industry don't feel. I mean, when you talk to them, they don't believe in that empowerment. When you're talking to them off camera, by the way. That's not the terms they use. They use them when they're on camera and their pimps are within, spitting distance of them. But in reality, I've interviewed so many women in and out of the sex industry, and this is not a term that they use. It's a term that they are forced to use to shill for the porn industry because they need the work. They need, we live in a patriarchal, capitalist, racist society, and you need to put food on the table. And especially if you've got kids, you'll do whatever it takes to put food on the table. Certainly, if that was the only way I could have fed my kids, that I would have done it. There's no question if that was the only way. So, I want to give an example. I love what you said about empowerment being a feeling. So I was going to give an interview on one of the big, I think it was CNN. So I was flying on the 7 o'clock shuttle from 7 a.m. from Boston to New York. And of course, who's on the 7 a.m. shuttle? It's basically American capital, right? Going from Boston to New York. So I get on this shuttle at 7 a.m. I'm the only woman on there. All these guys are dressed in three-piece suits. And I happen to have been reading a third wave book, and the actual introduction was done by a very well-known third waver. And what she was saying was, before she wrote the introduction to the book, she felt really empowered because she'd just gone out and had a full Brazilian wax. And that made her feel, she put this in the introduction, okay, to the book. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, you know what, I'm going to tap one of these guys on the shoulder on the plane. I'm going to say, you might think you're empowered because you own Wall Street and you own money. But let me tell you, you're not empowered. It's our bikini waxes that empower us. How hideous is that? Yeah. That to say that. And just as I was sitting on that plane looking at all of these guys going, backwards and forwards between the main places of capital in America, and this, somehow the Brazilian wax trumped being a hedge fund guy or whatever they were doing going to New York. It just shows that they've got no material analysis. It's if I feel this way or if I think this way, but that's not how we live our lives. We live our lives within an ecosystem of institutions that consistently work to limit women's life chances. The economy, the legal system, the medical system. We don't live as individuals feeling empowered or disempowered. We have to live within this system that men have set up in order to reproduce the power that they have. And we have to, and many women, especially the third wave neoliberals, will settle for the crumbs of the system, the absolute crumbs. Forget half the pie. They're just settling for the crumbs.
My jaw is still dropping at the idea of feeling empowered by Brazilian wax. Reminds me, when you get a haircut and you're feeling super fresh and you feel like you're on top of the world, it's like you feel maybe good about yourself for a day, but it's not going to get you a promotion at work. It's not going to put money in your bank account. It's not going to, make you able to influence, the government and so on. Yeah, that was ridiculous.
Yeah, that's not empowerment. That's just grooming.
No, and also remember the bikini wax. What it's doing is pulling hair from, the most, one of the most painful parts of the body in terms of, waxing. And women bleed during it. When I was writing Pornland, I interviewed women who worked in manicure and pedicure shops who were doing Brazilian waxes. And they said, I hate doing it. The women are in pain. I have to deal with the blood. And they also said, interestingly, the women said, I feel like I'm turning them into a child, and I hate to do it. This is what we're meant to settle for empowerment.
It feels like cope. It's like they know that they don't have any power, so they tell themselves they're in control so that they don't feel like it's very psychologically uncomfortable to be aware of the fact that you don't have any power.
I think because it's infinitely monetizable to sell people empowerment in a form of a product. So liberal feminism is more successful because it's more easily grasped in the capitalist system, right? Because you can sell people stuff with it.
Exactly. Well, the irony is the gym at the bottom of my road, which is for women only, is called empowerment. So evidently you can get empowerment through going to the gym. Through your membership. It's just ludicrous that this is what it's considered as. So I think you're making really important points here. And also, I think, all of us, I think as human beings, we have a desire to have power over our lives. This is what it means to feel like you exist, you're seen, and that you can survive in this system. And this is what patriarchy does. It robs women of the power they have in order to survive. And I mean here very much on the material level, putting food on the table, having, shelter and all the things that you need to make life livable. So you rob women of that, and then you sell it back to them in go and get your bikini wax, go and, dress up in a certain way so that you look hot and fuckable. That's the empowerment.
So this is kind of a touchy topic. Here's where we've gotten into some controversy with some of the radical feminists who have been part of FDS. Is like, FDS is at the end of the day still a dating strategy. So we do frame a lot of our cultural critique from a radical feminist lens, but with the understanding that most women who are heterosexual are going to date men and they want to be sexually attractive to men. How do you reconcile like the reality of heterosexuality with the pressure to perform for men, right? Like it just seems like a really hard balance to strike. And we've been attempting to do it here, but it's not always like, it's not without criticism, right? Like we don't necessarily always go into like, if people want to wear makeup, like we don't go a ton into like critique of the beauty industry, but we do say like, obviously if you're hurting yourself by getting like plastic surgery or anything that's going to like cause you infection or do damage, it's probably not worth to do. And don't let capitalism make you insecure about things that like you weren't insecure about before. There's been like, there was like a magazine I saw where they were talking about like people having dark elbows and knees. And I was like, if they hadn't put this in this magazine, I never would have thought about that. Right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Think about hip dips. Like, great, another thing for me to be insecure about.
Exactly.
I never would have thought about that. So I guess my question to you, just to kind of talk about this, because this is a controversy, I think, for us, is like, how do you reconcile like wanting to be sexually attracted to men? Because, women do, and especially young girls when like they're just discovering having crushes on boys.
They want boys to like them.
And then also feeling and actually staying empowered, actually empowered to set your boundaries and not unintentionally exploiting yourself, I should say.
I don't think they can be reconciled. The truth is, and I saw this in my classes because, when I was teaching my feminist theories seminar, the students would have to read books and then they'd have to do a report on them and an analysis. And always when we got into the beauty industry, what would happen is that this is where they would really fall apart. And they couldn't write the article. They'd say, I need a week. The students would say, we cannot write our reflection papers. You need to give us longer. Because for them, the heterosexual women were struggling so much with this, with the knowing the beauty industry, the harms it caused, the way we were forced to self-sexualize. And this was always, of all I taught, this always caused the most discomfort in the class. And at one point I said to the students, look, don't drive yourself crazy. If you need to wear makeup to feel better because that's how you've been socialized, you know what? We've got bigger fish to fry, which is pulling down patriarchy. So don't drive yourself nuts. Do what you have to do and figure out what the boundaries are. But I said, the most important thing is don't mind fuck yourself. Don't say I'm doing this because I want to do it for me. Understand that this is how women have been socialized. It's been ingrained in women through the culture. Just understand that. And at some point, come to some sense of, I can go this far self-sexualizing, but no further. And figure out what your lines are. But I told my students, we've got so much work to do as radical feminists that really sitting there worrying over whether you should put that extra bit of makeup on it's really taking away from the work that we need to be done. And the interesting thing is, there's so many ways, if we didn't live in a patriarchal system, that what it would mean to be sexually attractive. It would mean to be smart, funny, have an interesting, be quirky and all of these things. But what a patriarchal porn culture does is say the only way that you can be visible is to be fuckable. Forget the PhD, forget the interesting person you are, you're just stripped bare of everything that makes you human, and in its place you're offered this fuckability image. So I just think it's an incredibly difficult thing that we put young women in. And I think, what I would like is what's really sexually hot is a man seeing a woman and thinking, God, she's really interesting. I'd love to get to know her. I'm so interested in what she thinks, those things. And given that we live in hookup culture, the last thing he's interested in is anything she's got to say. All he wants is, his quick 10 minutes and off he is to the next one. So women really are the collateral damage of this. And I think it does incredible damage to their mental health, because on the one hand, they do want to be seen and visible, and they know that means looking fuckable. And on the other hand, they really resent it because they understand they're being reduced to this, disposable sex object. So I think it's a line that's very difficult to walk for individual women. And that's why we need a movement to support women to figure out, how do you negotiate being heterosexual and wanting to be with men in a patriarchal culture that trains men to hate women?
Yeah, I don't think there's any easy answers for that, honestly.
No, there's not. There really isn't. And I wish I had, 5 easy answers to women, but it's not. It's all, and that's what I feel it's so hard about the work I do, is like, you have it, when I'm at conferences and some people are giving different talks, they'll say, these are the 5 things you can do. Well, I haven't got 5 things you can do. I've only got really one, which is a feminist revolution. And that's not an easy thing to do. We're going to have to build a movement. We're going to have to fight and all of those things. And I think, what we've really lost in feminism because of these fights between the faux feminists and the radical feminists is we've lost a supportive movement. When, I'm older than you are. And when I came out as a feminist, I had this fabulous support system around me of wonderful women. And now what you get, especially, when you see on social media, is just women tearing into each other, and I have to lay some of the blame now at the radical feminist movement. I've seen, things on Facebook and other places where, you don't tear into each other. Let's forge sisterhood and let's figure out, although we might disagree on certain things, what is the best way we can support each other? The culture is tearing us apart. Don't add to this.
It's almost like a divide and rule, isn't it?
The only thing that I have to add to that is that, a lot of the beauty that we do is for the male gaze. And so one of the ways that I've been kind of coping with that is by embracing the female gaze, if that makes sense. Well, no, Gail, what you're describing about, I want someone who, a man who thinks I'm like funny and interesting and likes my personality and so on. I heard that and I'm like, yeah, that's like my ultimate fantasy. And you think about, a lot of romance novels where, it's like an ordinary girl, but the guy, just falls madly in love with her because of her, personality or whatever. That's like every woman's, fantasy, I guess. And so I think like there is value in maybe just like being honest with yourself about what you want and, what you think makes you attractive and, not really concerning yourself with whether men think that's attractive. Like the PhD thing, like men say all the time, like, oh, I can't fuck your PhD. And it's like, well, I don't care if you can't fuck my PhD. I want a PhD because it benefits me and it's what I want.
And it gives me power in the world. It gives me power as well.
They're not going to stop trying to have sex with us. That's kind of the whole like gaffe about the whole thing, right? Like if we all get PhDs, then they're just going to be forced to have sex with women with PhDs and like cry about it, right? Like,
actually, I'm just thinking, given the Texas anti-abortion law, maybe the actual best way is for all to get high-level careers, and that's the best form of contraception. The guys all want a male from powerful women. Really, the best form of contraception is being a powerful woman, because men don't want that.
They won't. It's all bluff.
Some guys are into that, though.
There's some men are, but what often happens is when men are attracted to powerful women, often once they get in a relationship, they do their damnedest to rip the power away from them. Because they didn't like that, And I can say some stuff personally about when I met my partner, and we've been together well over 40 years, was so interesting. I remember we were out with friends and we were like 19 and there was 4 different couples, all heterosexual, and we were having a dinner. Somebody, had a dinner party. We were students, so you can imagine what that looked like as a student dinner party. But anyway, we were having fun, and then suddenly, and David and I are having this real discussion about feminism, because I really felt that this was a man I really wanted to be with, but he had to understand on a deep level what feminism was. And I turn around, and all the other 3 couples have gone off to have sex. And we're fighting over the dinner table. And I remember at one point I turned to him and I said to him, look, if we go any further in our relationship, then you have to recognize that my civil and human rights are fully equal to yours and they're not up for negotiation. That's it. And he just looked at me and he said, you're right. You're absolutely right. So, there's plenty of time to have sex. It was more important that we got that out of the way before we could move on to a serious relationship, because I was not going to be with any man who in any way didn't recognize and fully respect my civil and human rights, and that it was going to be a relationship based on justice and equality. Otherwise, I was going to walk away. And he saw that. He wanted that. But that was a different generation of men as well. Completely different generation of men.
Yeah, I find men these days, like older men have this sort of like benevolent sexism, like I don't want to say benevolent, but it's like slightly more benign. It still sucks, but it's like not as actively hostile as what a lot of younger men are having. I think what we're going through is this huge backlash to feminism, and misogyny has become so much more extreme to sort of counteract that.
Totally. And you can thank porn for that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where we get into porn. I mean, the studies show, what guys want to do when you ask them in studies, what are the sex acts you want? It's always number one is come on a face, then number two is anal, and number three is a threesome. And, again, when I was growing up, if a guy said, can I come on your face? We would have run a mile. We would have thought he was a psychopath or something. Honest to God, yeah, who is this man? And I'm getting the hell out of here. Whereas today, what my students would tell me, that they don't even ask if they can come on your face. They just do. And they've seen that in porn. That's for them the power over women. They're above her. They can, come on her face. She's degraded and debased, and they know she's degraded and debased because, one particular study that was really interesting out of NYU, where the guys actually said in the end, we really like this because we know she hates it.
Yeah, that's horrifying. So
what do you say about that? That men have been trained to be sexually aroused by harming women and hurting women and degrading them. That's what this is. This is thank you to the porn industry, who have created a whole generation of men where there's eroticization of violence against women is kind of normalized now.
So we've gone over some of the challenges that our pornified culture has presented to young women. What can we really do? I know you've done a lot of work with Culture Reframed, so can you kind of explain what your work's about and then how it's working to impact or at least change the conversation around porn?
Yeah, so what we are is we define ourselves as a public health organization, and we see pornography as the public health crisis of the digital age. And we build programs specifically for parents, for educators, for medical professionals, experts in general, to how to help young people build resilience and resistance to porn culture. So this is what we do, is sort of raise awareness. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is when you're saying, that pornography is a major form of sex education today, which we know from studies it is. The question is, what are we going to do about that? And one of the answers is we need really good sex ed to help kids really think through what's going on in this culture. And what you notice is most sex ed programs, most of them are crap anyway and don't deal with anything. And so what happens is the kids, and in the UK it was mandated. It's not in the US where I am, but in the UK it was mandated in 2020 to teach sex and relationship education. And what happened is Culture Reframed got all of these teachers coming at us begging for materials on how to teach sex ed with a porn critical lens. Because if you don't do that, what happens is you have kids coming into the class, especially the boys, but also girls, but especially the boys, whose sexual template has been formed by pornography. So then if you don't deal with that and help them deconstruct and interrogate what they have been taught by the porn industry and the porn culture, there's no way you're going to be able to teach sex ed, which is based more on connection, relationships, intimacy, equality. So what we're doing on October the 2nd and 3rd is we are holding what I think is the first ever international conference on how to teach sex ed with a feminist porn critical lens. And we've got speakers from sex ed, from child safeguarding. We've got you, and we're all excited about what you're going to talk about. We've got a whole array of speakers looking at how can we tackle this through sex ed that specifically has this porn critical lens. And of course, you can't have a porn critical lens unless you've got a feminist lens. So it's going to be a great conference. We've got speakers from the US, UK, Sweden, India, Turkey, and we're going to be really analysing what is the best way to build sex education. And it's going to be much broader than just that, because we are also going to be looking at how pornography impacts young people. What are the social, emotional, cognitive and sexual harms? And how do we then build materials to support these young people to really get rid of the ideologies and the templates and the narratives of pornography. And this is really what I would say progressive education is about. You have to unpack the hegemony, the mainstream dominant ideology, and in this case, that's produced by pornography for what we're dealing with, and help them sit back and think, well, what have I learned from pornography? Because pornography is not just about images of sex. What pornography is a whole discourse and narrative and story about masculinity, about femininity, about patriarchy, about relationships, about sexual class equality or inequality. So we're really coming at this with everything we've got. And it's very affordable. We have tickets for people who are low resourced. And I don't think everyone has ever tried this really before, is to really tackle this from a multidisciplinary viewpoint and keeping true to the feminist project, which is to basically make sure that we do not bring up a generation of young people thinking that pornography should be their form of sex ed, and that pornography is the way to go and have sex, because that's what we know is happening. The more the kids are going to porn, the more they're having porn sex.
Yeah, we're really excited to be able to add our voice to the conversation, because I think, we feel very confident that like we're going to be able to expand. We've been expanding obviously off of just Reddit, but onto our general social media, and the ideas that we've been putting out have really been resonating with women who maybe aren't like traditional feminists or like traditional Redditors, or people who are super plugged in online into like these conversations. So our hope by adding our voice and also expanding our platform is that we make this kind of information accessible to women who are just like regular everyday women who maybe aren't even like super plugged into like the whole feminist network, but like who can really just start to see and understand how porn has really influenced the culture in a lot of really negative ways, and help them to navigate in their dating life how to circumvent that. I'm really excited because I think for us, especially too, we're gonna learn as much as we possibly can from this conference, as well as like put in our 2 cents about what we're doing. So
great. Well, I'm so happy to have you. I mean, it's so important what you're doing. And we've also got, we've put a lot of pro-feminist men in to speak about how you work with men to basically get them to see the sex class privileges they have and to unpack that. So we're doing some sessions on what does consent mean in a patriarchal society when girls have been socialized from the word go to comply with patriarchy. So we've got people like Jackson Katz speaking. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's one of the, I would say probably the world's leading pro-feminist man developing programs and education for men. Because, often what happens at these conferences is we talk about women all the time, but the truth is, men are often the problem, and we need to address that, and not in a way that is kind of comes after them, although, many of us are aggravated with what men are doing, but in ways that give them an opportunity to step back and think how they've been socialized into the porn culture. And is this what they want to be? Are these the men they want to be? Do they want to look in the mirror and think to themselves, I'm a guy who jerks off to violence against women? And I would really argue, I think many men actually probably don't want that. I'm sure there's those who do, and, those need to be dropped on a desert island and kept far away from.
They need to go to Rapist Island. Yeah.
On our Rapist Island.
This is a recurring joke.
Call back to a previous episode. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But, the irony here is that as feminists, we get called man-haters, and we're the opposite. We actually are the only group rooting for men's humanity. We're the only group who've argued over and over and over again that what pornography says about men is not true. That men are not just life support systems for erect penises. They're fully human.
Like that.
Yeah, that's the image of men in porn,
Life
honestly.
support systems for an erect penis. Yeah.
Well, we know many of them who are not that.
A few of them are, I mean.
Some men embrace that with their whole heart.
Yeah. No, but I know what you're saying. There's plenty of men who, and to reiterate your point, there's definitely a hunger for that. And I mean, obviously, there's actually a huge movement towards that on Reddit itself, with things like NoFap or men who
That's
are
right.
trying to unplug from the porn network. Unfortunately, it feels like the only people who have really like legitimately addressed this with men has come from the religious right. But of course, they come from a certain ideological framework.
Yeah, NoFap doesn't. NoFap is not. Alex Rhodes, who runs that, is absolutely not religious, not right wing in any ways, progressive. But a lot of the so-called recovery programs are run by the religious right wing and don't address. Unlike any other substance,
they're hungry for people that aren't from the religious right to just tell them like what they kind of maybe intuitively are feeling and knowing. And so I think that's hopefully what this will provide an actual scientific critical lens about how it's affecting people. That's not just like coming from people who are trying to do it based on, their beliefs in God.
Well, that's not happening at our conference. I can tell you that. We're progressive, feminists, and often I get phone calls from journalists, and they'll say, "So, Gail Dines, you're a right-wing conservative," and I'll say, "Well, actually, I'm a left-wing Jewish radical feminist. So, apart from that, you got everything right." I mean. This is Culture Reframed is a science-based, research-driven organization. We are not a faith-based organization at all. And I think in the United States, there's probably some others in Europe, but I'm saying in the United States, we are the only anti-porn organization that is not faith-based, and that comes at this from a scientific, research-driven place, which, is ridiculous. Because
it's a shame.
Isn't it? We should have tons of competition out there, and we haven't at all. So this is why we were really driven to have this conference. And what I love about it is, first of all, we're coming at this from so many different approaches, from pediatrics, from feminist theory, from neuroscience, from activism. So, for those 2 days, we're just going to have so many speakers from so many different angles. But of course, what joins them all is a feminist understanding that pornography causes violence against women and children in its production and consumption. That's what we all agree on. And then everyone takes their own area of expertise and expands on that. So there's going to be lots of speakers, and then we're going to have breakout sessions and discussions. And I have to say, we went live last week, and we've had hundreds already register, and we've not even started really our full on media promotion. So clearly there's a hunger for this, just given our registration figures.
And just to kind of touch on your point before about how there's just no porn critical education that's not faith-based, that's been a really interesting realization for us, because I know recently the New York Times has run a piece about like sex educators that are kind of sort of trying to bridge the gap, but they're still coming at it from a very pro-porn lens. And it's actually, I think there was one woman who had taught it in like a pretty elite private school, and like the parents were like so outraged, she actually got fired. And so now, instead of like retooling the porn critical education and like looking for existing literature from people like yourself, it's like they're trying to push the idea that like all these parents are reactionary. I think this woman was like literally showing people porn.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, she was showing the kids porn. I mean, which of course is a complete violation of their rights. Okay. And two, it's illegal because they were under 18, And interestingly, a lot of people in the UK contacted me because there's private organisations now developing curriculum, and they sent me some of the porn curriculum that they're teaching around sex ed and porn, and it's a lot of it is pro porn. I mean, they're saying things like there's no evidence that porn can harm you, or it has a negative impact, and you should learn how to use it responsibly. That's like telling somebody how to drive drunk responsibly. Right? I mean, you wouldn't do that. So what we're trying to do is really fill the gap here and come at this through a porn critical lens that is not in any way faith-based or driven by morality, but is driven by science and driven by activism. I mean, that's the other thing. We need activists doing this, feminist activists, because, you know, who really makes the change in the long run? It's feminist activists when it comes to this issue. The science is really important because we use that as our tools to make the argument. But ultimately, you couldn't have any piece of science that would convince the oppressor to stop oppressing the oppressed, right? So we feel with pornography, as much as we, you know, the science is so crucial and it's all showing exactly what we're saying about the harms, it's the activists who are going to have to change this world.
Yeah, it's been very, very strange to me how there's been this media almost like blackout of any information that actually does show that porn is having a negative effect individually and culturally. They seem to focus on like either studies that are somewhat inconclusive or saying that like, oh, it's not actually causing men to go out and like physically beat up women as much, but like all of the other research about how it's depicting criminalized sexual activity as normal, about how it's leading to men having more sexually coercive behaviors towards women, for which there is research. It's like they're summarily ignoring that. How do you feel about that? Or like, how does that, I don't get the point of doing that. And like, why do you think there's been such a media blackout in admitting that like there's actually some harmful effects of porn?
Well, there's, I think, a couple of reasons. First of all, there's a lot of economic connections between the mainstream media and the porn industry. You've got to remember that. Money speaks louder than anything. Also, a lot of the journalists today have been brought up in a media, in a porn culture. So they themselves have internalized the porn scripts. So what's interesting is when I do, and I get interviewed a lot, I really do bring to the journalists a ton of research and say, look, in the social science community, when we're discussing pornography, we're not saying, does it harm or not? We know that from 40 years of research. What we're doing is doing a more sort of nuanced analysis of the harms and what are the protective factors. If you live in the social science community, nobody thinks that porn has no harm. I mean, we've just got too much research to show. And what increasingly the neuroscience research is showing how the dopamine releases reframe and reshape the brain of the men and boys who are using it. So I think what's going on here is that the media have a vested interest in promoting pornography. Also, you have what's called the Free Speech Coalition, a hideous name, but it's the lobbying arm of the porn industry. They do a ton of press releases. They're always on the phone with journalists. So they have a lot of power in shaping the narrative. And often as feminists, we don't have that same power. So this is why we're holding this conference as well, is to introduce people to the research. We have some of the great researchers out there talking about their research. So we're going to give sort of something for everybody, from research right through to activism.
I'm really excited for the part about having men talk about porn to men, because, having conversations with men about porn as a woman, it's challenging because it's almost like, for men who are very misogynistic, they aren't going to listen to women. It's unfair, but that's just the reality. It's like they only believe it when they hear it from another man.
Exactly, which is terrible.
Yeah, it's terrible that it's like that, but it's the unfortunate reality that if we want to change things, we have to get men on board and, speaking out.
Yeah, it's the reality. And there are men on board. I have to tell you, I've worked with many of my co-authors have been men, and they are, as opposed to porn as feminists are, they're pro-feminist men. And also they have an insight that women don't have, in the sense that I have to say, I've studied porn for over 30 years. I know the research inside and out. I know the economics of the industry. And on some level, I really don't understand it. There's something about it in that knowing place where when I look at it, there's a part of me that still doesn't understand, how is this arousing? And what's interesting with the men that I've worked with who are anti-porn and have a great critique is they have a very hard time doing this research. The reason being is they hate porn, they hate the violence it causes, and yet when they're doing the research, they get aroused. And they feel like their body is betraying them. These are men who feel that is intense bodily betrayal given what their politics are and how they really feel about porn.
You can groom people. I mean, Facebook actually just came under fire because they have moderators that go through a lot of the explicit content that gets reported. And one of the things that the moderators were saying is that just from looking at they would see really, really like disgusting, disturbing, illegal things like people sexually abusing animals, etc. And he said just like repeated exposure to the violence, it started to almost like he had a reaction to some of the sexualized images.
It gives a PTSD.
Oh, yeah.
It gave him PTSD. Yeah. And like severe PTSD, both because like it's unexpected, but also like, him judging himself. I mean, like I was never like this. I never used to have these thoughts. And now these thoughts are intrusive because I've been exposed to these images so often.
Exactly. Well, I heard a talk by, I think it was the head of the police in Sweden, where they were talking about, the child sexual abuse images and how the police are dealing with this. They said that the police who deal with child sexual abuse images have more PTSD than the detectives who deal with homicide.
I could believe it. Yeah.
And that they have to switch them out about every 3 months because they just... and actually, one of the people who's going to be speaking, Dr. Sharon Cooper, who is a forensic pediatrician, she actually trains people in the FBI how to deal with the trauma of what they're looking at. And Sharon's one of our opening speakers, and she's a actual, as I say, forensic pediatrician, and she also has her own practice. And I don't think I've ever met anybody who knows more about the effects of pornography on kids than Sharon. Just listening to her for 45 minutes will change your world. Incredible, because she deals with the victims of it. She deals with the perpetrators. I mean, and I met Sharon because both of us were expert witnesses against a very well-known pornographer, and I'm happy to say that we actually bankrupted him, and that's how I met her many, many years ago. And yeah, we did. We bankrupted him, and we took down his industry, his company, which was great, by the way, wonderful. A highlight of one's life.
Yeah. Queen.
Yeah, and the other thing is, now we know as well as what's his name, Jeremey. He's got how many cases against him?
Yes.
And I think there's 30 cases against him of sexual abuse. But you know what? He's been in over 1,500 porn movies. So I would argue that he's probably sexually abused well over 3,000 women, not 30 women.
Oh, for sure.
Because what is porn if not the sexual abuse of women? And he's a particularly unsavory porn performer who's really sadistic.
Why is Ron Jeremy the number one male porn performer?
I don't get it. He gives me the creeps.
That's another female gaze problem, okay? I don't want to see fucking Ron Jeremy.
Who let this creep in? Yeah.
He's not very pleasant to look at. He certainly is not. But you know what? Interestingly, I'll tell you why Ron Jeremy was so successful in the early years, because he could sustain an erection for a long period of time and not ejaculate. He wouldn't make it in the porn industry because of Viagra. Right? If you notice, Viagra changed the whole scene because now they have much more men we would consider conventionally hot who can go in it because the Viagra helps them sustain their...
Just barely, but yeah. Sorry.
No, it's right.
Teasing.
I mean, it's really interesting when you see the change when Viagra hit and what the men look like. Because, there was very few men who could sustain an erection for that length of time. And then when the director said, come, who could come at the drop of a hat, he was one of the few. That's why he was so successful. He would not get, looking like he does, he would not get into porn today. And hopefully he's headed to prison. I hope he's headed for prison. And, I debated him. I think it was on CNN.
Oh, you debated Ron Jeremy.
Oh, yeah. I was on CNN, and he kept saying, my job when I go on to debate pornographers is to basically just cut them to pieces, right? That to go in there, show no mercy, and just destroy them. And I was really going after him. He kept coming back, and I was just coming after him. And at one point, he said something like, "That woman," and he pointed to me. I said, "Well, my name is Dr. Gail Dines, not that woman." And because they're so used to treating women with disrespect, and then, kept interrupting me. And I said, and I actually at one point, I said, I'm not surprised you're interrupting me, because have you ever listened to a woman in your life, Ron Jeremy? Because that's not your job, is it? Your job is to treat them as disposable sex objects and move on to the next one. So this is why it's such a problem debating pornographers, because you don't know how to listen to a woman.
I just looked it up on YouTube. I can't wait to watch that immediately after. We'll put this in the show notes.
They took out the best bits when I really went after him.
Really?
They edited it out. Yes, the parts where I really went for the jugular, they took out.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Which is really upsetting.
That's how you know it's like a media conspiracy to, promote porn. They'll cut out the parts where you actually like win the argument and then create a more biased narrative.
Yeah, but I have to say, it's talk about cathartic when you've got a male pornographer and your job is just to eviscerate them in public. What's a better thing than that? That's a radical feminist dream,
We should do a roast a scrote for Ron Jeremy after this.
Yeah.
100%.
Honest to God. We should do one of our episodes.
Oh, what a creepy, horrible guy. Absolutely.
But this is also why I don't buy the argument that porn can ever be feminist, because if you look at even now, like the actors who are in porn, they never, like Liv said, ever appeal to the female gaze. Ever.
No. Well, they're not. You know what they're meant to do, actually, is interesting. What the role of the man in pornography is to really the focus of the camera, where they put the gaze, is on his penis. Right, so that the man the users who are watching it can identify with him and his penis rather than having to see him completely, because they want to put themselves in that position, thinking of themselves doing to the women what they're doing. So what's very interesting when you look at some films is the men are really backgrounded, and it's their penises that are foreground.
Yeah, that's actually really, really disappointing as a heterosexual woman, and this is why I feel like they're gaslighting us about this being like empowering and like sexually arousing for women, because I'm like, I can't go in and like type in a category of a men's body type that I like, but like you can find porn for every single minuscule piece of a woman's body, but there's nothing for men. Let's just say I like tall men with like broad shoulders and I don't know, like dark eyes. Like you can't even find that kind of thing.
And if you did, you wouldn't like it after you'd watched him anyway. Believe me, that would be a complete arousal killer, watching a guy in porn, I mean,
like, can I find handsome man porn and not all these like weird bridge trolled porn? Like, but no, there's nothing like.
I almost feel like they cast ugly men in porn on purpose, because a lot of the men who watch porn are probably, to not intimidate not that attractive, and so that's why they identify with them.
Well, that's actually, all men watch porn now.
True.
All men do. The truth is, given the studies, it's, there was one study they were doing in a university where it was in, experimental psychology. They wanted to measure the effects of pornography, and they had to cancel the study because they couldn't find a control group of students who hadn't seen porn.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're not going to, all guys watch porn. I mean, what's really interesting, what would be really interesting would to do research on the guys who don't watch porn. They're the deviants, right? The guys who don't watch porn are the deviants in our culture now.
I think it's impossible to find a man who's never seen porn, but I've met a fair amount of men who don't watch porn, who have watched porn in the past, but just like realize this is not adding to my life in any material way. So I don't want to like, because one of the discussions that we've had with some of our members, I'm like, well, it's impossible to find guys that don't watch porn. I feel it's actually, first of all, if you like express that it's a problem, and like he gets like, feels like he's being cornered and stuff, like this is some kind of like necessity to his life. It's almost like an indicator that his sexual needs are always going to come before yours. And then secondly, the fact that like a lot of women who have had sex with men who are not porn watchers, the sex is just so demonstrably better that a lot of women don't want to go back, right? You can't even go back.
Oh yeah, I can't compare it. No, you can't. I mean, what I think the best thing I ever heard a man, it was actually a college student describing, he said, porn taught me how to masturbate into a woman.
Yeah, facts.
yeah.
That's what it feels
That's
like.
what it feels like, being a fleshlight.
Yeah, you're being masturbated into. And, you know, my students used to tell me they immediately know when a guy's a porn user. They can feel it in everything, his body, the way he relates to them, the way he's dissociated during sex, or he's pulling. Because, you know, what we found in studies is that men who watch porn, and it doesn't have to be a lot of porn, when they're actually having sex with a real woman there, and not watching porn, and they're having sex, they pull up their favorite porn scenes and they play them in their head as they're having sex with that real woman. So of course they are masturbating into it.
Yeah, how wild and like pathetic is that in some respects? Like who?
Yeah.
And it makes sense because I know sexlessness is rising among young men in particular, and a lot of it is because young women are sort of opting out of having sex. Rather, they don't want to be masturbated on, and it's because the experiences are not enticing for a lot of young women anymore.
Yeah, unfortunately, though, many women know they know something's wrong. The sex is lousy and bad, and they feel like a piece of meat, but they haven't got the language to say he's masturbating into me, because that term suddenly makes everything crystal clear. What's happening? You don't exist. He's not with you. He's dissociated. He's miles away from you, although he might be on top of you. But it doesn't matter because he's not there. He's not present.
Yeah, we get that a lot from women who, when they find FDS, a lot of women say, I'd always known something was wrong, but I didn't really know, I didn't have the vocabulary for it, or I didn't know, basically FDS, we make things crystal clear and help women understand exactly why it's not, what exactly is wrong.
We're explicit. We have a flair called porn sick limp dick, and we don't really apologize for it. We just say,
we don't beat around the bush.
No, you're incredibly, I have to say, the stuff listening to you are so incredibly articulate, and you've actually, what you do, I love it while being on this show, is you take all these concepts and it's like you absolutely, how can I put it? Like a trash compactor, you bring it down to its core and you just spit out these pearls of wisdom, I mean, just wonderful the way that you deal with the concepts and make them accessible.
We're millennials, our attention spans are short, so we try to make our media that way.
Yeah, it has to be in 280 characters or less, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not easy to do. It's not easy to do what you're doing. I mean, it's the hardest thing is to take complex concepts and make them accessible.
Yeah.
I mean, and you do a fantastic job of that. Absolutely fantastic
Thank
job.
you. I wanted to tell Gail a little bit about, I don't know if you listened to our episode about BDSM. In that episode, I talk a bit about how when I was 14, I dated a guy who was 16, and he showed me porn that was very, degrading. And he pretty much was like, this is sex. This is what I want to do. And because, I'd learned how to, put on condoms and stuff, but I didn't really... they don't teach you in sex ed about boundaries or what's normal sexual behavior and what's not, right? So seeing that and you think, oh, well, I guess that's what everyone's talking about, the sex thing, right? So it's alarming to me how porn is basically used to groom young women into not having boundaries or to do sexual things for the man that maybe they don't particularly enjoy.
Totally.
What was creepy is looking back, my boyfriend would praise me whenever we did something gross, and then because at the time you're a teenager, your hormones are crazy, you want boys to like you, and so you think oh, I'm doing good, right? So when you get praised for that, and so it's a very insidious form of grooming.
Oh, absolutely. That's what again, studies have found that often men know especially around anal sex, when they want their partners to have anal sex, the way they introduce it is through porn, is they'll get their partners to watch anal sex porn. And I remember interviewing one guy, and he was saying how he was very carefully judging her response. And as he was showing her more and more anal sex porn over time, he was figuring out, is this the time now to anally penetrate her? Because he was grooming her, and he had a very sharp eye on at what point could he then come in for the kill for anal sex, because she didn't want it, and he was using that to groom. And also, pimps use pornography to groom prostituted girls and women. That's one of the biggest groomers, is pornography, to show them what to do. And what's really never taught barely ever taught in sex ed, which is like the thing you can't talk about, women's sexual pleasure. Right? You're told that you're going to get pregnant, you're going to get STIs, you're never told that you are entitled to sexual pleasure.
Right.
That's completely missing from most. And that's another thing we're going to talk about at the conference, is the role of teaching girls and women about their right to sexual pleasure. Because what studies show is the more you foreground sexual pleasure in sex ed, the less likely she is to be sexually victimized, and the more likely she is to put sex off till she's older. And you know why? Because she suddenly realizes she has a right to say no. And I don't want to put the blame on the women by any means, or girls for being raped. It's always on the men and boys. But there's a way in which showing the sexual pleasure that she is entitled to and has a right to provides the capacity for her to build more sexual boundaries around her.
Yeah. No, when I was younger, I remember feeling like this is something I have to do. I remember feeling this like deep sense of dread.
And they're putting it in teen magazines.
Yeah, Teen Vogue is terrible. I mean,
like teaching, especially teaching, for example, young girls how to do anal and BDSM, choking in Teen Vogue.
Yeah, there was a huge thing in teen. It was enormous, showing you what to do, how to get ready for it, not telling you, by the way, what can happen if anything goes wrong. First of all, it's not that pleasurable for women, and secondly, if anything goes wrong, you can cause terrible internal damage, and none of that was really discussed.
It's almost treated as a given that this is something you're supposed to do.
Exactly, and you're a prude if you don't. You're a prude. They've got you every which way. You're a prude.
As in, the people writing this don't even have the credentials to be talking about it. I think the author of that particular article, who we've kind of lambasted before, she didn't have any credentials on the topic. And everyone's like, why are you having someone who's just essentially a person with a bachelor's degree in journalism, trying to explain complex sex
that's
education?
going to give you a good sex
Yeah,
ed
nothing.
background.
And so it's not even that they're just giving, that they're breaching the topic to young kids. Because remember, when you're talking about the teen magazines, the target audience is 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, because everyone above that is reading the adult magazines. Broaching that subject with very young kids, and then with someone who is so clearly uneducated on the topic.
I know, it was outrageous. That did get a lot of pushback, I have to say. I mean, I think if they took it a little bit too far, and I'm really glad that they got pushback from that one. But you're absolutely right. What is somebody with a degree in journalism doing dispensing sex education?
Just reinforcing the narrative that they want. I mean, that's just what it comes down to.
That's exactly right. Well, can you imagine, having someone in a medical journal who's got no medical background talking about that? I mean, it's ludicrous. Only in this do you not have to have any background in the topic that you're talking about. And
it's kind of, and actually, I kind of wanted to ask you about this because we were discussing about whether or not we should talk about, and I think we will at some point, talk about the sexology industry as a whole and how so much of it is
some
scams.
Of them are grifters, yeah.
Some of them are just straight grifters. There's basically these sexology diploma mills. They're not accredited. Some of them have been shut down, and they sometimes pull ideas from these quote unquote sex educators or sexologists that are just basically made up. They're not part of any type of formal research program. Then they just start to create a narrative that the media picks up on.
Oh, sexology is terrible. It's a terrible field.
A lot of them are just sexually depraved people who want to feel okay with it.
Yeah, it's really weird. And it's sad because I feel like women could really use legitimate research from people who are biologists and people who.
Absolutely. I'd love to give you a quote. So when I first was doing this many, many years ago, one of the most famous sort of sex therapists, sex researchers was John Money. Have you heard of him?
Yes, I've heard of John Money.
Yeah, he was from, I think...
he was a psychologist who did the David Reimer study. Is that John Hopkins?
Yes, he was at John Hopkins. So I was at a conference where he gave the keynote lecture. And you know what he said? He said, we need to, this is in my brain, I will never forget this. He said, we need to redefine incest as a love affair between two people of discrepant ages.
What?
Yeah. In a full auditorium of of experts. He said a love affair between two people of discrepant ages.
Incest?
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
I can remember we studied him in like during my A-level psychology, and but yeah, when we read that, everyone's jaw, including like the men in the room, just dropped. We were just absolutely mortified.
No, they've got a lot to answer for. Those people, the so-called sexologists and the sex researchers. And actually, there's a lot of great feminist stuff written about that. And I can name some of the, Megan Tyler has done some great work on this about really looking at the core of the theories and where they came from and how it developed and how misogynist the whole field is. It really, sex educators often are some of the worst that we come up against when we're trying to have a discussion around pornography. I remember being interviewed for Women's Health, the magazine, and it was actually an interview. And I went to New York for it, and I'm talking to this therapist, and we're talking about being filmed about pornography. And in the break, she was saying to me how much she loves pornography and watching pornography, and she does that for fun. And this was a sex therapist.
Yeah, when I hear women who say, I watch porn with my husband, we love to do it, it's a fun couple activity together. I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah, totally.
I've never seen feminist porn. Like, they keep saying that there's feminist porn, and like I've never seen it because like it's so male gazy. Yeah,
I haven't either. And believe me, I've looked for it everywhere. And first of all, you can't have such a thing. You can't have the word feminist next to the word pornography, right? It's an oxymoron. But even those things they call feminist porn, it's basically, I remember going on Erica Lust's website, and she's like considered the queen of feminist porn. And I remember looking at the stuff, and there was a woman on her knees with a penis right down her throat. And I thought, oh, I've never seen that before. This is really novel, I mean, they do the same shit that the regular pornographers do. They just hide behind the flag of feminism.
They admit that part of that is because it's not easily monetizable. Quote unquote feminist porn isn't monetizable as readily as porn that is catering to the male gaze. So in order for them to stay profitable, they end up having to create the same kind of thing, right?
They do the same thing. Yeah. I've got a great story about Erica Lust. I was contacted last year by two filmmakers who were doing a documentary on Erica Lust. And I said, I'm not really interested in talking about it because I don't agree with her. And, any documentary around this, I'm sure is going to be praising her. And they said, no, we absolutely promise we're going to do a balanced viewpoint. We really want you. So they interviewed me for 2 hours, right? And I said to them, are you really going to give a critique of her? And they said, yes, we'll use you. The documentary comes out. I think it's an hour long. It's 58 minutes on Erica Lust and 2 minutes on me. So I saw it. So then they said, they had the cheek to then write to me, said, will you promote our documentary? And I said, yes. And I went on my Facebook page and I said, here's my promotion for the documentary on Erica Lust. Don't watch it.
Nice.
Yeah, that was my promotional. Don't watch it. It's shit, I mean, they love Erica Lust. They really do. And let me tell you, the stuff she does, the way she debases women, and she really gaslights them because she says it's feminist porn. So, like, when one of them's having a really hard time and they're upset, because it's feminist, she gives them a bottle of water, and says, and puts her arm around them and said, it'll be fine. Now carry on.
Oh, no.
Jesus.
I can't bear her. If I hear that name again, it makes me want to go into a full-on feminist fit.
So, Gail, I'd like to get your reaction to this idea that's been floating around on LibFem Twitter, which is the concept of entry-level porn for kids.
Deep, exasperated sigh.
I don't know if you've heard about this.
I get asked this a lot. You mean, what should we show kids?
Like, there was I think she was a journalist. I can't remember her name, Ro. Maybe you can help me out. But she posted something like, oh, kids are find porn anyway, so we may as well like show them porn that shows consent and blah 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 to like teach them, I don't know what her point was, but she basically floated this idea of entry level porn for kids, and of course she got dragged, right, because it's a terrible idea. But I'd like to hear you roast it.
Well, first of all, I don't know what you'd show them, because the porn, I don't know anywhere where you could get non-violent
Yeah, what would you show
porn.
them exactly?
Yeah, the number one. Number two is, even if it's not overtly violent, the very fact that you're commodifying and monetizing a woman's body is a form of violence against that woman and all women. So, to start legitimizing pornography in any way to kids is just ludicrous, because what they'll listen to this, and adults are saying this is okay and it's entry level. Well, what you're doing is you're just basically telling them that misogyny and pornography is fine. So I'm completely opposed to that. It's like, what should we give them, an entry level cigarette?
Right.
At 14.
I was actually just about to say, that was my response. I said, it's like we hear from representatives of the tobacco industry about giving them, mango flavored and grape flavored cigarettes to, get them hooked on it young, kind of thing.
Yeah,
So,
and let's do entry level alcohol. What should we do for that?
yeah, it's just a way of getting them addicted from a young age. Like,
Totally.
Plus, I feel like they don't know how kids work. Like, if parents try to make like sex cool, or they try to make like feminist porn cool, then they're gonna want to go look for taboo stuff just to be rebellious. You know what I'm saying? Like, it almost seems like that would backfire, because then it would become like part of lame parent culture.
Oh, totally. On so many levels. And it was interesting because a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, I did a kind of tour of LA, and I must have spoken in about 20 different places. And I have to say, it was mainly in LA I got this question all the time. Should we show them Playboy so they don't go to the hardcore porn? And I kept getting this question.
it's just a pipeline from one to the other.
Exactly. So would you say, I don't want my kids to get to heroin, so maybe I'll just give them at 12 some marijuana, and let's see where they go with that. But that question came up in LA over and over and over again. And and what that shows is an absolute lack of understanding of what sexuality is about, what pornography does to sexuality, and that you're actually saying to boys, you have the right and the privilege to look at women and masturbate to them because that's all they're worth. So you're reinforcing all of patriarchal ideology by showing them anything.
Yeah, it seems there's like they have an allergy to boundaries almost. And I don't know what that is exactly but that's a lot of the justification for showing these kinds of things to children, as well as like the BDSM conversation we had earlier was like, oh, I don't want to shame them for having fantasies. And I'm like, shaming them is quite a bit different from like actively introducing them to things, right?
Promoting it, yeah.
Exactly. And also, they say BDSM, the alphabet soup, but it's really S. It's sadistic men on the prowl for vulnerable women. That's what I found with my students who were so-called into the BDSM community. So many of them, the women had been raped and had sort of been led down the garden path to BDSM by these predators who could smell these women a mile off. So, I mean, I deconstruct the BDSM and just say, let's highlight the S, the sadism of the men.
I mean, I was in the BDSM community for a long time, about 5 years, and I fully believe that the normalization of BDSM is 100% to do with porn, because all the dominant men, or the dominant, in quotation, marks, men that I met, they all said, I watched porn and then I found women, submissive women who I could act out my fantasies, out on. And it's a progressive erosion of boundary of the BDSM, because within a dynamic, they've even got something like, for example, soft limits, which basically means that, it's basically a boundary that can be stretched. And so even then you see the breaking down of boundaries.
What's interesting as well is, some of the prominent women in the so-called BDSM communities actually come forward to talk about the level of sexual abuse and rape, and that this whole notion of safe words doesn't exist, and that they've been really horribly hurt.
It's honestly prolific.
But okay, so the wild thing about the BDSM community is when it comes out that a dom was abusive or raped someone, they always say, oh, well, he's not a real dom, he's just an abuser. They use this no true Scotsman argument. And it's like, well, all these guys who are claim to be doms are coming out and end up, being abusive or rapists. And it's almost like there's some kind of relationship between wanting to be a sadist and, being abusive, right?
You would think.
Now, I was going to say, BDSM is, if we look at the history of BDSM, it was founded upon the Marquis de Sade, who was I think he was a French noble who basically got his rocks off by kidnapping and sodomizing his servants.
You know what? BDSM is a beard. That's what you do. If you're a sadistic guy and you want to beat the shit out of women and you don't want to think of yourself as a rapist, then you just say you're into the BDSM community. It's just a beard. Okay, so I often think that, the alphabet soup of BDSM is a beard. That sadistic men who really want to just rape women, abuse women, don't want to see themselves in that way. So what they do is they use the BDSM argument, and that way they can be woke and cutting edge and transgressive, and they can rape women in the name of being woke and transgressive. So I've got very little patience with this. It's sadism. And the ones I've met, and I'm often picketed by BDSM groups when I'm giving lectures, and the men are particularly sadistic, and I can feel it oozing out of them.
And they can also be shielded from their misogyny.
Yeah. No, I've dated guys like that where they think that they're one of the good guys, but they don't want to be seen as a piece of shit abuser. And so that's why they do BDSM.
Exactly. That's right. I mean, I'm into the BDSM community, Look at me. Look how woke I am.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Do we have any more questions for Gail, or our audience is going to love this? A lot of people were, for the last episode, people were saying, I could listen to 5 hours of Gail Dines.
Oh, that's nice. I don't know if I've got 5 hours in me, to be honest with you, but never mind. But I'm so glad you had me back on, and I'm really grateful that you're promoting our conference. I'm so happy you're speaking.
We're glad to have
you. Just wonderful that we've made this connection, and that I'm sure it's going to continue. Because you really, in a way, are the young women who embody the values of Culture Reframed.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And, I'm so glad we kind of stumbled upon each other, because we really need young women out there speaking about this world and what it's like to live in this world. And there's just, and so many women are silenced through fear, cancel culture, what have you. So you're just providing an incredible, the goddess's work. That's what you're doing, the goddess's work.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you know what would be great if there was a donor out there listening to this who wanted to make social change and really help you develop this into a movement, because this is so critical. And nobody's better to take this on than you three. You're just wonderful. And
thank you so much.
So this is the kind of work we need to be doing. This is exactly the kind of work we need to be doing. And I can't wait for you to be at the conference. I'm dying to hear what you've got to say.
I'm so excited.
So I'll make sure I come into your breakout session and be part of it and moderate it with the question and answers and everything.
It's been great having you back.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
You so
Gail.
much.
Okay, well, it's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure, anytime.
And that's our show. Please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/The Female Dating Strategy for weekly bonus content. Our bonus content last week was the second half of the 16 Rules of Misogyny. So if you wanted to continue that discussion, please check it out. You can also check out our website at thefemaledatingstrategy.com. There's a forum there if you want to interact with other female dating strategy followers, as well as follow us on Twitter at fem.strat. Thanks for listening, queens. And for all you scrotes out there, sign up for the Culture Reframed workshop so you can learn.
Because you really need it.
Yeah, you actually really, really, really need it. So, really need it. A lot of you need to read.
Really need it.
Yeah. And it's on Saturday and Sunday, October 2nd through 3rd, 2021, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern time, and then 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. UK time. It's called Taking on Porn, Developing Resilience and Resistance Through Sex Education. So please sign up. The website is culturereframed.org/conference. We will be there giving our own lecture. So if you want the opportunity to listen to a lot of different academics on the impact of porn, as well as how to build resilience against porn culture, this will be a wonderful workshop.
Thanks, guys.
See you next week.